Section 2, Nmap Discovery and Basic Scanning. All right, so now that we've got our lab set up and verified, in this section, we're going to take a look at how to use Nmap in our environment to perform some basic scanning and discovery of hosts. Now, with that said, in this section, we're going to cover some basic Nmap usage. Here, we'll verify Nmap is working, we'll run some basic scans, as well as dissect the information that Nmap is returning in our command window. And once we get familiar with Nmap, we'll look at some host discovery options, that is, revealing the hosts that are running on our network, as well as revealing hosts that are possibly hidden. Now, during our discovery process, we're going to talk about the ICMP, TCP, and UDP protocols and how they're used to scan and discover hosts. This will be particularly useful because later on in the section, we'll use them to analyze our hosts. This is going to include information such as the hosts running services, their versions, and their operating systems. Let's begin by exploring the basic usage of Nmap. Now, although Nmap is an advanced security tool, it's really meant to be easy. To begin, we could simply issue a command from the command line, or we can use the GUI. To do this, we simply enter Nmap, followed by our target's network address. However, Nmap is flexible in that we aren't limited to just a single network address. We could also use a DNS name, a single target address, a specified number of hosts within a network range, or an external list. We can also exclude hosts if we also choose. So let's start by accessing our Kali Linux VM, and we'll issue some Nmap commands at the command line. This will be our very first scanning session, and we'll verify Nmap is working properly, and we'll get accustomed to the tool. All right, so as you can see here, I've got my Kali Linux VM up and running, and I've brought up a command window. Now, before I typically run any new tools, I like to run that tool without any options to see what type of help facility is included. So let's issue our Nmap command now without any options and see what's returned to us. So Nmap, and we will pipe it to less. And as you can see here, there are many options included, some of which we've talked about already, such as the target specification. This is how we can tell Nmap what host to scan, and these options will actually be a part of our first scan attempt. Also here, we've got all of our different type of host discovery options. We're going to use those in a little bit to discover hosts, as well as the different types of scans there are available to us. We have information about which flags to use when scanning certain ports, how to perform service and OS detection, how to run scripts, which options to use for timing, security device evasion, and the different ways that we can tell Nmap to present the information to us. Lastly, we've got some miscellaneous options and some simple examples. Now, although there are quite a few options and running scans with many different command line switches can be a little bit intimidating, don't worry because during the course, we're going to be covering a lot of these switches as well as discussing how these options work under the covers. Now, because we're going to be going on the assumption that you'll be using Nmap in the enterprise, for this hands-on exercise, we've of course assumed you know something about the network you're scanning. This is in fact true because we've set up our own lab, but also be aware that you may have gaps in your information and you'll want to verify information given to you by your staff. Also keep in mind that we'll want to continue to think like an attacker. So at this point, let's run an Nmap scan at a target. Now, to perform this operation, we can simply type Nmap followed by the target host. Now, this host could be different and it'll depend on how you have your lab set up. For the purposes of this exercise, we'll instruct Nmap to scan our Metasploit VM IP address. So let's go ahead and do that just by typing Nmap and the IP address of our Metasploit VM. So Nmap 192.168.0.129. And so, once Nmap completes its scan, you can see that it responds with information about its target. You can see that in this instance of our Metasploitable VM, that the host is up and responding, and has a series of open ports. You can also see at the end of the list what MAC address the device has. Now, in this instance, we're only scanning one machine, which is great if you're only interested in one machine. Now, during your process, you may identify one machine, you may want to scan it and analyze it, and that's great. But what if you have an entire network range you want to scan? Well, you can do that with Nmap as well. Instead of just one target, you can simply use the network range by identifying it with Cedar notation. So let's go ahead and scan our entire network range. We can do that by typing Nmap and the network range we're interested in. In this case, it's 192.168.0.0/24. This will scan for all the hosts in the entire Class C block. So let's go ahead and enter that now. So Nmap 192.168.0.0/24. We press enter. As you can see in the output, Nmap scans the entire Class C network block of 256 IP addresses in around 7 seconds. Also in the output is the report for all the hosts that Nmap identified on the network. If we scroll up, we can see that Nmap lists the ports for these devices, and from here we could further investigate these hosts if we so choose. But for now, let's look at one last basic usage option, which is scanning from a list of hosts. Now, as I mentioned previously, if you're performing an internal test, there could be instances where information about your network is given to you already. In these instances, we could scan each network or host from the command line, but that may take some time, and we could automate this a little bit by scanning these hosts from a list. Now, with a list, we could mix and match hosts, networks, or DNS names, similarly to how we would from the command line. The only difference here is that we need to create our list first and then pass it to Nmap during the scanning process. So let's create our list with a network and host and then pass it to Nmap using the -il switch. So we'll just use a tool called Nano and we'll create a file called hosts. So hosts, press enter. And in our file, we're just going to put 2 lines. The first will be 192.168.0.0/24, which is our network. And on the second line, we'll just use a host. So 192.168.0.131. So all we have to do is go ahead and save that. We write it to hosts. And now we can use that in our nmap command. So nmap, and we use the -il target and our hosts file. And then we press enter. And as you can see here, we get an output similar to our command line where Nmap has gone ahead and scanned 257 IP addresses. That's 256 in our network and the single IP address that we specified on the next line. Now, before we move on to host discovery, I do want to mention that depending on how you have Nmap set up in your environment, you may need to issue commands with elevated privileges using sudo. Also understand that depending on the type of scan you choose, such as scanning a /8 network, this could take a bit of time as there are over 16 million hosts. So just keep these points in mind when planning to use Nmap in the enterprise.